About 500,000 people in the US have come into the country on what's known as an H-1B visa, a work permit designed for high-skilled workers. More than 70% of them are Indians, many of them technology workers. But it seems like President Trump doesn't really want them. In June, he issued a proclamation temporarily blocking foreign workers entering the country on these visas. Any jobs lost as a result of the COVID pandemic, he said, should go to Americans first, not foreigners. It's worrying some American businesses. Here's the former CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt.
This high skills immigration is crucial to American competitiveness, building these new companies and so forth. America does not have enough people with those skills, those very specialized skills, to fill it. We need these people. I don't agree with the current view on this matter in the government because I know from a fact that we need them in Silicon Valley. Another interesting statistic is that half of the founders of the Silicon Valley companies are foreign-born, many of whom have been born in India.
Well, many H-1B visa holders were caught out by President Trump's proclamation. Purvi Chotani is with LawQuest, an immigration organization in India and the US.
So one gentleman, he came to India to get a new visa stamp, but his visa stamping got delayed because the consulates locked down. So he is over here waiting for things to open up. In the meantime, the proclamation comes. So he continues to wait over here. His wife is in the United States on an H-1B visa herself. She is desperate to have her husband back. Her two daughters are in India. One daughter is an American national because she was born there, and one daughter is an Indian national who needs a visa to go back, again stuck with the father. But in the middle of all this, the poor gentleman had a stroke or a heart attack and he died. And then the wife traveled to India for the last rites. But now she needs a visa to go back to America because her visa has expired. With the wait times for H-1B visas, the appointments we are getting is February and March 2021. That's too late for her because 6 months down the road, who knows whether she'll have a job then. This is our most sad story that I'm dealing with just now.
I mean, the majority of H-1B holders are Indian nationals. Do they feel targeted by this?
They do feel targeted on one level, but there's a sense of resignation, and in the individuals there's a sense of karma. Okay, it's my karma, I'm not going to be there till 2021.
At what point, though, do Indians in particular on this type of visa decide that actually they don't want to go to America anymore because it's not particularly welcoming?
I would say that number is very, very tiny because the lure of the American dream outweighs the difficulties that they're facing just now. I actually have not had any individual come and tell me, you know what, scrap my H-1B, I'm not interested. Not one.
Purvi Chotani. So the American dream lives on. Perhaps it does too for the roughly 45 million immigrants living in the United States, about 10 million of whom are there illegally. But the outcome of the November presidential elections will determine whether that can remain the case, because President Trump's election campaign promises ever more restrictions on immigration and foreign workers. Teresa Cardinal Brown is Director of Immigration and Cross-Border Policy at the Bipartisan Policy Center.
Well, he has achieved a reduction in the number of people at the U.S.-Mexico border primarily by just denying the ability to apply for asylum. There have been somewhat increased arrests of undocumented people inside the United States, although deportations have not been as high as they were, frankly, under the Obama administration. In terms of restricting legal immigration, a lot of that has come due to various bans and restrictions on entry that he has issued, particularly the last two earlier this year under the auspices of trying to quote-unquote protect jobs for U.S. workers who have lost them due to COVID.
What has the economic impact of all this been? Just the fact that immigration has been curbed to the extent that it has?
We're still waiting to see. For example, we know that international students coming to the United States are down, and that can have a long-term effect because a lot of international students do find ways to stay in the United States and contribute to the economy in the future. Foreign students do tend to pay higher tuition rates, which helps supplement some of the domestic students. You look at the reduction in high-skilled immigration in the United States, there's a lot of people involved in innovation and cutting-edge technology areas who are very afraid that we will lose a leading edge to other countries in development of the next generation of, for example, artificial intelligence or medicines because we're not able to get people to the United States to work on those issues. Agricultural employers are afraid that they're going to suffer losses because crops can't be picked. So there are lots of different parts of the economy that can be impacted. But over the long term, The real concern is that the United States just isn't a place people want to come anymore. Our population stagnation due to low birth rates has been offset traditionally over the last 30 years by increased immigration. If that changes, we could easily find ourselves in a similar position to Japan, China, Russia, with an aging and shrinking population and workforce.
What can we expect from both parties and candidates in terms of immigration policy? What is still on the to-do list for President Trump if he wins in November?
I think what we can expect is a continuation of the policies we've already seen, an attempt to make them more permanent via regulation. The Biden candidacy's immigration platform is much more detailed. Much of it is about, frankly, just undoing many of these executive actions of the Trump administration. But there are also proposals for broad-based legalization of undocumented people, changes to the legal immigration system to expand certain types of work visas while offering increased protections to U.S. workers, allow more unionization, for example.
Right, because even Joe Biden is saying that the U.S. immigration system is broken.
You know, it's interesting you say that. We did a survey a couple of years ago where we asked Americans to pick an adjective to describe the immigration system, and the number one adjective was broken. And that was number one across all parties, across all demographics. There is nobody that thinks that the system that we have right now actually works. And a lot of Americans just want to see a system that they believe is functioning, selecting people that will succeed in the United States. There's a lot of consensus agreement on what that might look like if we can kind of get away from a lot of the political rhetoric and get people to start talking about that.
Teresa Cardinal Brown of the Bipartisan Policy Center. So is there really any prospect of this broken immigration system getting fixed? Mark Krikorian is Executive Director of the Washington-based Center for Immigration Studies. It's a think tank calling for more restrictions on who comes into the United States. And despite big drops in both legal and illegal immigration under President Trump, he thinks this administration has not gone far enough.
The areas I think they've fallen short have been enforcement related to the employment of illegal immigrants, because that's the key factor in illegal immigration. The magnet that draws people is the ability to work. And while the administration has, in fact, somewhat increased worksite enforcement, it's still almost comically inadequate. I'm just not sure how committed the president is to it. This is why he talks about border fencing and walls and the rest of it, is that that's an easier way of talking about illegal immigration. And fining companies that are knowingly employing illegal immigrants is the kind of thing that's going to create more pushback.
But at the end of the day, to enact permanent change to the American immigration system, you need both parties to work on policy. And the way President Trump addresses immigration and his policies on immigration are seen by many as xenophobic and racist, making it almost impossible to bring bipartisan agreement to the matter.
That's not correct. Both President Obama and President George W. Bush made serious efforts working with congressmen on both sides of the aisle on immigration and utterly failed, because this isn't really so much a left-right issue as it is a winners and versus losers, an insiders versus outsiders issue. Trump could be as PC in his rhetoric as you might want, and it doesn't change the basic political dynamic that a huge portion of the public simply disagrees with the elite view, both among Republicans and Democrats, that if some immigration is good, more must be better.
But what about legal immigration? Particularly since the COVID pandemic hit, we've seen President Trump clamp down on HB1 visas for high-skilled foreign workers. Are you supportive of that?
Absolutely. I mean, some H-1B workers are, in fact, genuinely highly skilled. Most of them are routine people doing routine computer work. It is simply a cheap labor importation scheme.
But a lot of companies will point out it's not easy to hire foreign workers in America. You have to go through lots of bureaucratic hoops. And the fact that so many companies are willing to take the time and trouble to hire a foreign worker, isn't that in itself an indication that there's a skill set missing from the American labour force and that they need to go overseas to look for that kind of labour?
No, they don't. I mean, I'm sorry, but that's simply false. First of all, H-1B visa holders mainly come as foreign students. Then they get the so-called optional practical training program, which is the legal fiction that they pretend to be students on student visas, but they're actually workers. Honestly, if it was me, I'd just abolish the program altogether.
So you think that the tech companies are lying when they're saying they need these foreign workers? They're not telling the truth?
They're paying lobbyists to lie. Yes, of course. I mean, what do lobbyists do?
Well, let me quote to you Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google. He points out that almost half of Silicon Valley founders are foreign-born. Isn't that the kind of innovation America needs? Why would you want to push that away?
Because it's not leading to innovation. If we're talking about individual, genuinely best and brightest talents, I'm willing to concede the admission of a certain number of them. But there simply are not tens of thousands of Einsteins born into humanity every year. This is something that is beneficial to the tech companies, but it's not beneficial to American workers, nor is it beneficial to the broader American economy. The idea that continent-spanning nation with 1/3 billion people that invented the modern world needs a, constant trickle of computer programmers from South India is absurd.
But there will be people who say you are destroying the American dream by posing these kind of policies and views.
Destroying the American dream for whom is the question. The logical conclusion of this American dream rhetoric is that everybody should be able to come in without any numerical limitation.
What do you say to people who say that behind this argument is actually a sense that if the people applying for H-1B high-skilled visas were white in the main rather than from the Asian subcontinent, there wouldn't be this pushback against the visa system, that it is actually about racism?
My response? How dare you? Who the hell do you think you are, impugning somebody's motives rather than arguing the substance of their argument? The question is, how do we run this government program? Should it be bigger? Should it be smaller? Should it be managed differently? That's where the debate is, not in these attempts at impugning motives, the real point of which is to silence dissent. And, I won't be silenced.
Mark Krikorian of the Centre for Immigration Studies. Well, the question then is, what evidence is there that restrictions on legal immigration have encouraged companies to hire more Americans? It's a question that Britta Glennon researched. She's professor at the Wharton School of Business in the US.
So if we look first at historical evidence, in the past, when immigration restrictions have tightened, firms will actually hire them in other countries, right? So if you are a multinational firm that's based in the US, you need these workers, you can't hire them in the US, but you can hire them in Canada relatively easily. You may just open a foreign affiliate in Canada.
And has that happened under Trump? Can you name companies that have actually done that?
So I can name companies that have threatened to do that. So Duolingo, Boston Consulting Group, they've very recently announced that rather than rescinding offers to those affected by the visa rules, they would just move those jobs to Canada or elsewhere. I can't name the companies in my own paper because it's confidential data, but I do see this happening prior to the Trump administration, and those were actually much less restrictive rules than these, so one can imagine that this would be an even more common phenomenon.
Was that mainly in the tech sector, or was it quite broad-based?
So I actually tried excluding all tech companies from my data, and I found the same result. It has something to do with how R&D intensive a company is and how offshoreable their activities are.
And the companies that you spoke to and surveyed, when they move like this, do they move everything? Do they move their whole operation so that, we're talking about a loss of more American jobs, in effect?
They don't move their entire operation, right? So they're likely to keep at least some of their offices in the U.S., but they may shift some of the people they had in, their Silicon Valley office, for example, into their Vancouver office and things like that. And these are skilled workers as well, R&D intensive, software engineers, IT workers.
But the point is, if President Trump is re-elected and his immigration policies continue, you don't expect that clampdown to create more jobs for Americans in America.
No, in fact, it might have the reverse effect, right? Because some companies that may have wanted to invest in the US are going to invest elsewhere. You're going to have US companies that may shift some of their activities to another country. And then you're going to have startups that would have been started by immigrants that are now starting up in other countries and employing people who are not Americans.
Britta Glennon, will any of these arguments matter to ordinary Americans as they head into their polling booths or fill out their voter forms? Back to Teresa Cardinal Brown of the Bipartisan Policy Center.
Is this the issue that's going to decide the election? No, I don't believe so. In most of the surveys, immigration is somewhere in the top 5, usually falls below the economy and education, and this year definitely falls behind healthcare and COVID.
So if President Trump makes it a platform for his campaign, as he did in 2016, is he getting it wrong, do you think, then?
He is making it an issue because his voters see it as an important issue. On the Democratic side, it doesn't have quite as high a salience. And so if you look at Biden, it's not necessarily something he's talking about all the time. This election is going to be decided not just by those base voters, though, by a lot of people who are in the middle. And for them, jobs, the economy, COVID-19, the social justice movements over racial equity, all of those are right now taking much more primacy than the immigration issues are.
So we shall see. Teresa Cardinal Brown there.